years ago, Oklahoma City basketball fans saw the best performances they've ever seen. 40 years later, we're seeing some of the worst. I'm sports editor Mike Sherman, and this is the Press Row. With me this week, our guest Barry Trammell, a columnist who's going to talk about that great basketball Oklahoma City saw 40 years ago. Jenny Carlson's going to talk about the basketball we've been living through this year. But first, let's talk about the breaking news. Injuries to the Oklahoma Sooners and the impact it's going to have on their hopes of winning the BCS championship against Florida. Barry, first we find out DeMarco Murray's not going to play because of a leg injury. A day later, DeMarcus Granger goes down, surgery on his back. Which of these two injuries most hurt the Sooners?
I think the loss of Murray will hurt the Sooners more. Granger's a very good player, great run stuffer. But Murray is really effective coming out of the backfield in the passing game. I don't think it'll affect the running game much. Chris Brown has proven to be a very, very solid tailback in the run game. Actually has better numbers than Murray this year, including breakaways. So the running game, not so much. The passing game will be affected. The Sooners played some of this season without Granger. And while he's a very good player, they've got Adrian Taylor in there who's been starting ahead of Granger most of the year. Corey Bennett's a longtime veteran, very solid player, and then you got Gerald McCoy on the other side. I think it's the kind of injury OU can sustain at defensive tackle.
But if this were a baseball team, you'd be removing a home run hitter from the middle of the lineup. I mean, they're missing a home run hitter.
Well, I don't think you can say that either of these will be without some impact. I think it's going to have some impact. I mean, Barry hit on the way DeMarco has been involved with the pass game out of the backfield in addition to his running ability. But I think with the defensive linemen, obviously you're screwing up the rotation. And Florida's going to look to maximize the number of snaps offensively that they have against OU's defense. So the more guys that you have able to platoon on that defensive line, I think the better off you are. So I don't think it's going to be a loss without any impact losing DeMarcus Granger. But they have played some without him, which I think might help sort of ease that transition. If it was a couple days before the game and they're suddenly without, yikes, that might be a little more scary. But it's still going to be a change. I don't see it as impactful as maybe if you lose a Gerald McCoy or a linebacker or somebody like that.
The Sooners played the Fiesta Bowl without both of these guys. How'd that work out for them?
Well, they also played without Malcolm Kelly and Reggie Smith and Lindy Holmes. If they lose three more guys, it's not going to work out very well. I think if this is all they lose, I think they should be okay. And I'm not saying that means they beat Florida. I'm saying these are the kind of losses that a good team overcomes. So, it's on the Sooners' back now to make sure that they get it done.
Don't you think that Florida's unique offense really puts a strain on the defensive linemen? Maybe even that's why I'm leaning towards saying Granger's the bigger loss, because Florida's got a power running game with its quarterback as the fullback. And you talked about it, Jenny. They're going to try to play keep away a little bit. Yeah. Florida can score, but they're not as explosive as the Sooners. I'm just wondering if that doesn't really take toll on an OU defense and linebacker core. These big guys block for the linebackers.
Yeah, and I think, when you talk about Tebow and his running ability, he's going to start smashing into those linebackers, the Keenan Claytons and those guys, and that just puts a huge emphasis on their tackling ability every time he takes off. And that's going to be a lot. I mean, he's going to run it a decent amount. So to lose a good quality defensive lineman out of that rotation, I think it just adds even more pressure on a linebacking core that frankly doesn't need a lot more pressure put on it.
Okay, let's switch over to the opposite side. Florida's Tim Tebow has made a couple comments right after the Big 12 championship game and the SEC championship game. He more or less said, boy, I can't wait to play one of these Big 12 defenses. After the Heisman Trophy voting was announced, after Sam Bradford was given the bronze statue, he more or less said, I'm getting a lot of texts, and my guys are really fired up, and this is a revenge thing. Do we make anything of that, Barry?
No, talk doesn't matter. Never has, never will. Larry Burdine yakking before the USC game is not the reason OU got blown out. Joe Namath yakking in Miami 40 years ago is not the reason the Jets won. Talk is cheap, doesn't matter at all.
I can't believe I've forgotten about Larry Burdine. I'm glad you brought that back up. There's a good memory right there. Yeah, I think that it's nice to talk about. The SEC does statistically have really good defenses, but I'll contend again, and I'll say this until we see the national championship game. I think there's good defense being played in the Big 12, but when you're pressured as much as, especially in the South, the Big 12 South teams' offenses, the pressure that they put on defenses are going to give up some points. I mean, shutouts are a thing of the past in the Big 12 South. So statistically, it looks like the SEC has got far and away better defenses. I'm just not convinced that personnel-wise, if you line up these teams against the same kind of team, if you wouldn't see some of the same results if you put an SEC defense in the Big 12 and put a Big 12 defense in the SEC.
Last question about the BCS championship game, which is still a long ways off. 3 weeks, right?
Tonight.
Barry, speed. The SEC is lauded as the conference where speed lives. Speed in the secondary, speed on linebackers, speed everywhere. What impact will that have on this game?
Well, I mean, speed's a factor in every game, but Oklahoma's fast too. And just for the record, West Virginia was fast. The reason West Virginia rolled Oklahoma was because West Virginia was faster than the Sooners, and West Virginia doesn't play in the SEC. So almost every really good top-flight team has speed. You don't see a lot of plotters out there. Ohio State's fast, in case anybody wants to argue the Big Ten. Ohio State's put as many people in the NFL in the last decade as anybody. So here's the deal on this game. No one's going to get out-athleted. Both teams are putting supreme athletes, elite-level athletes out there. There's no chance that Florida's got more team speed than the Sooners.
Well,
if it is, it's very marginal, I think. I mean, this is a game where I think the game planning will have a big factor, and then the execution of that game plan. That's what's going to determine this game.
Jenny, you buying that? I still think that after watching Florida and the way their defense flies around a little bit and the way they played after the Ole Miss game, that maybe Florida has an advantage when it comes to team speed.
I think there may be some advantage at some positions, but I don't think it's going to be that we're all going to look out there and go, man, OU's moving, a step slower, 2 steps slower. I just don't think that's going to happen. So speed is one thing, but you got to be able to use that speed. And OU's got some guys in some critical positions that know how to use it. I mean, guys like, Nick Harris, who can get after you and hit you when he gets there. Joaquin Iglesias, who, I don't know, his 40 speed may not be great, but when he gets in the open field, he'll take off on you. So they have to use that speed in a way that's really beneficial. And I think they can exploit those areas where they do have maybe a slight speed advantage. But I don't think it's going to be a huge difference in this game.